Hi Sean, thanks for coming in for a chat for our coaching resources.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
So today we want to chat a little bit about your new role as a IAAF Athlete Representative.
Yep.
So can you tell me how difficult that was to achieve that standard?
Yeah, it's a pretty long process. There's an exam every 2 years, so every odd year they have an exam for it in January. And basically you need Athletics Australia to be in good standing with them, and you submit it's like a 20-page document, you get it signed by a JP, all that sort of usual stuff, and it gets sent over to Monaco, where the IAAF are, and they send you out test details, and you have to go to Tokyo. Take the test is the nearest test centre for us.
I believe the test was pretty hard.
Yeah, it's a very broad test, so the testing's on the World Athletics Series, whether that's World Championships, World Indoors, Diamond League, World Challenge, race walking, half marathon, so pretty much everything that you can think of that the IAAF does outside of the Olympic Games basically is on this test. And the tough thing is there's sort of probably 400 to 500 pages of material that it could be on, but you don't get very much direction on what it will be on. So, 48 question multiple choice test, and you need to score over 75%. And if you fail, you just have to wait 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
Wow, congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Pleasant surprise.
So we wanted to just go through from an athlete's and a coach's perspective, like why should an athlete or a coach look to engage a manager?
Yeah, I think conventionally it's a very risk-free solution in the sense that as the industry works, agents make their money out of proceeds of commercial or apparel-based or race-based earnings. So if your athlete runs particularly well at a meet where there is prize money, the industry standard would be probably 15% of that will go to the athlete. So, even if you can do the maths yourself, but it would need to be a pretty lucrative meet. Even if someone wins a Diamond League, it's $10,000 US, the agent only stands to make $1,500 US, which for the sort of time and effort and relationships that you need to get into those meets, that's a pretty small price to pay, really. So when you're thinking for our more up and coming athletes, if that's something like a Belgian race or a Flanders Cup and your athlete wins €200, you're not paying a great deal for someone that can usually guarantee you a spot in that race.
So thinking about engaging a manager, is there a certain time in your career where they should be thinking about it, or is it just purely performance based?
Yeah, I think it'll always be a combination of both factors, and for a lot of our up and coming under 20s it would be a question of whether they're looking to go to college in the US or not, and then obviously it's something you'd steer clear of to keep your amateurism intact. You still can interact with agents doing that, but if you're getting into apparel and things like that, it can make it a little murkier in terms of maintaining your eligibility. But if you decide that's not for you and you're going to do uni in Australia and you'd like to race in the US or the UK or different parts of Europe, often with athlete reps it's more just a source of information. So having someone who will have a better understanding of the meets themselves and which ones might be more appropriate and why they might be more appropriate in terms of performance and travel is the big one.
Yeah, talking about travel, so there comes a time probably around that 18 to 20-year-old age where athletes, particularly distance athletes I think, like to go over and sample that European running season.
Yeah, and I'd say there'd be a big mix in between whether depending on what time of the year you decide to do it, whether that's something you combine with a training camp or if it's just to race. So as we know, athletes will sort of conventionally go either just after nationals or in that June, July, August time period. If there's a specific set of meets they'd like to target, obviously just after nationals, it's more likely they'll go to the US. And the US bears more resemblance with our meets in terms of things being very much based on seeding and your performances and getting positions in heats based on basically your times. Whereas in Europe, it can be more difficult. You can often have the times that would make you competitive in that meet, but for a variety of reasons, you may or may not gain entry.
So would those athletes then engage a manager to potentially get them into some meets during the time they're away?
Maybe. So it's a mix. In terms of probably the easiest level to get into, which would be the Flanders Cup meets in Belgium, you can enter those by yourself. There are online entry portals. For a lot of athletes, the questions are more surrounding what to do and where. A lot of these resources, not to sell myself out of a role, but a lot of this stuff is available online. The European Athletics Federation has their calendar on their website on Jan 1 in an Excel spreadsheet as well, and there are thousands of meets. They list every single one. So if you're willing to do the research from that front and you have a European base that you're set on, it's not too difficult. The cache of meets that you have to have representation for are more commonly going to be World Challenges and Diamond League events.
What do you help with if they were to engage you in an overseas trip?
Yeah, I think often it's a little bit more than just entry. So it would be more making most use of your agent's relationships. So if that's a case of anything from when to travel, other athletes to travel with, especially if you're an athlete that's never gone overseas at all or never gone overseas to race, often it's a lot easier going with a group. And then again, in terms of housing, if you've got an apartment that you can all split the rent in, that's a lot easier than just being a single athlete and bouncing between Airbnbs or expensive hotel rooms. And from there, it would be people to train with, places to train. Often agents will have those connections and can recommend venues and training times and even overseas athletes that you can jump in with. And then more so from an experience standpoint, just mapping out a more logical progression of meets and having an A option, a B option and a C option, and how that mixes in with your budget as an athlete is the biggest thing. If you've got an unlimited budget, you can have a lot of fun over there. But for a lot of athletes, that's not the reality. And it's better to target meets that you probably know you can get into, and maybe have one or two in there that if things pan out, if you run well, you can do that. And then the back end of that is more reactive. If an athlete does run very well, it's good to have someone who can then ask questions of bigger meets or bigger opportunities.
Sounds like a travel agent.
Doesn't it? It's
like if you want to have a really great holiday and you want all the fine details addressed, you would go and book your holiday through a travel agent.
But it's to make athletes' lives easier.
Yeah.
So very often, I'll book flights and accommodation and set all that up and just send an athlete an invoice with their itinerary. So that's some people prefer to do that. Some people prefer to just leave it all to the athlete and they'll just sort the races. But I think because there's no strict definition of what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do as an athlete rep, you can help out with as much of that as need be.
Which is a huge help to the coaches that may or may not be going.
Yeah, I know a lot of coaches that don't actually like having too much involvement with that. They know, that an athlete might want 2 1500s and an 800, and they want someone else to do the background research on where will be best for that, why, and then you just sort of pitch that information to the coach and the athlete and go from there. And often really small things that do make a difference, an athlete and an agent, a family member, and all that sort of, knowing where to get results, knowing if there's a live stream or not. And those seem pretty arbitrary, but in terms of an athlete being more comfortable with everything, then that's, And often it's just having someone there as well, just someone that, if you're a bit nervous, you can have a chat to, or, obviously in a lot of situations they're not your coach either, so they're not going to try and tell you what to do. They're just going to reassure you that, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, so you would be communicating with the coach as well that whole time if you're away with an athlete?
Yeah, so even in sort of a lot of paperwork you get from the IAAF when you sign up, there are really clear sections that adhere to transparency and just like methods of communication, and that you as an agent are not supposed to make entries or decisions without consulting athletes and coaches, and you're supposed to keep them all in the loop basically.
So when the athlete is putting a package together, do you also offer the camp experience, and does that include altitude or?
It's very much up to athletes, and it'll often be very much up to who those athletes fit in with. So if you're a distance runner, for example, and you've got, especially in our example, we have a lot of Melbourne-based people that will go to at different times of the year. Flagstaff, there's a group of women at the moment over in St Moritz, and there are pros and cons to all of those camps. Often other training groups have also looked into new places in Spain as well, so there's a lot of options there in terms of how much altitude you'd like as well. I know the venue that MTC go to in Spain is only about 1500 metres, which is a little bit lower than Falls Creek, but means you can do a lot of faster stuff. Whereas if you go to Flagstaff, it's substantially higher and is probably more what you'd call conventional altitude. And then those camps will determine what races would be most reasonable to go to from there.
Straight off the altitude.
Yeah, and often that's a completely new concept to coaches as well, because they might never have been to altitude.
But you don't only deal with distance runners, you would deal with a variety, or do managers generally deal with a variety of event groups, or is it a manager goes to event specific almost?
I'd say at least in Australia we've got a pretty clear cut difference between managers that prefer to work with distance runners, because that's just the industry they've been in. Andy Stubbs, who's British, but he's Australian, but he works out of the UK. He works largely with field eventers, because again, that's a completely different set of relationships that you need. And things that will change from event to event, like if your event is laned or not, or if it's a field event, there's obviously stricter limitations on how many athletes can be in the comp. So it can be more or less difficult, to get someone into a high jump than a 5K, because you've got, you can almost stick 20 people on a start line with a 5K, whereas in a high jump you might only have 10 or 12 in the field. And I guess having an awareness of that is important. But like, for example, I've got one sprinter that I work with, and that, I guess, is just how willing you are to look into other meets, and knowing that sometimes sprinters may or may not mix in so well with the meets that distance runners will want to go to, or field eventers and vice versa. But very often there are meets where it's a good combination of all of those things, especially at the level that I guess the groupings that we're talking about out of that maybe TTP block, or very high end of the TTP block, may look at. And that's another thing as well, it's not a trip that is cheap usually, and it wouldn't be something I'd recommend unless someone was at effectively pretty much just on a world junior level of ability or higher at that age, because you're not going to be in, you might be in the meets that you'd like, but maybe there's the debate there that you could get that competition in Australia. So it's a bit of a juggling act between, do you need to go as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How are you going to fund that trip?
Yeah, because there's not a great deal of money in athletics.
Yeah. So we've covered off the camp. What about travel? So it can be quite hectic, can't it, when you put together a string of events for them to go to? So the travel in between, or perhaps you've got them into an event at the last minute unexpectedly, so that you can...
Yeah, I think athletes need to be sometimes willing to take a flight on very short notice, and that can often be expensive as well. So it depends how open you are to that. And there are definitely lower risk events you could pick, ones that you'll be locked into. There might be a couple of heats, and you just live with the fact that you could be in a B heat, and that's just where you're going to go. And the travel is tiring for athletes. So whilst that seems, it's a first world problem. If you're looking for basically optimal performance out of someone, it might not be best to race, 3 times in 6 days, because you're going to have performance alone, but also travel. So, you might have, as some athletes, they'll block out a day for travel. So if you have another meet coming up, you're in Italy, but you need to go to Sweden, maybe you'll say, okay, instead of flying, the absolute latest minute before the comp and getting there just the night before and sleeping and basically waking up and racing, try and get there early in the morning or even the day before if possible. And while sometimes that's a cost sort of benefit analysis, sometimes that little extra day of being able to settle in and have a routine and things like that can make a really big difference to just arriving, falling asleep and hoping you can sort of do it on the next day. But that's a reality of that. Yeah,
it's definitely just a personal preference and a history of your performance on both of those examples.
Some athletes race really well a few days off the plane, and other athletes need a week. A lot of that can just be mental as well with some athletes. Some athletes know it's just 15 to 20 hours of sitting, basically, and if they've got routines on a plane or in an airport that they can do, some athletes are really good at doing it. Ryan Gregson's a really good example. He often races Doha at the start of the year in the Diamond League circuit and flies straight there, gets there maybe 36 hours, 48 hours before his race. Ran a World Championships qualified this year, so some people can, and other people like to get there a week before and just sort of prep for it.
Thinking about athletes going away to Europe, obviously their health is also a big priority. Spend that much money going to Europe or over to the US. They want to make sure they get there healthy. So what do you normally put in place, and what do you advise your athletes and coaches?
I know Athletics Australia have done this recently as well. They put together basically little travel bags, and it seems a bit dorky at the time, but if you're 12 hours into a 30-hour journey, it can be really helpful. So basically an athlete of mine sort of suggested it as well. I thought it was a great idea. It's basically like a big clear plastic bag with very small amounts of hand sanitizer, strepsils that are antibacterial, even if you don't actually have a sore throat, but you're just trying to ward things off, They're not the worst tasting thing in the world. Hand wipes, zinc, magnesium, vitamin C, things that are actually pretty rooted in science for helping you out, even if you're just feeling a bit flat. And while some people may see it as a little bit absurd, it's like, if you've invested anywhere from $3,000 to $8,000 in a 1 week or multiple week trip, and what might only be 3 or 4 races, geez, if it's $30, $40 on a little healthy little bag, that can be really valuable.
So it's not just aisle seat or window seat.
No, that's part of it, and there are small things like that. Like, I know athletes love saving money, but is spending 18 hours in the airport really the best bet, or could you spend $200 more and get there 7 hours earlier? Stuff like that. So
or the extra leg room.
Yeah, and then the flip side of that is knowing athletes who have got a budget they have to work to get to a certain meet, and they just have to cop big bus or a flight with a lot of connections, and just instilling in athletes that that's a possibility and that they need to be ready for that.
Yeah, build that resilience for their travel.
Oh, definitely.
Training venues, I think, and how important that is in the whole booking of the accommodation around the events.
And I'd say that's why we see a lot of the same places are really popular to stay and train in and racing. I know Australians in the UK or in Europe make a lot of use of the UK in terms of staying in a particular part of London that's quite close to the airport. It has a big parks network right there to run on, and a track nearby to university, and that'll be the same in places where Athletics Australia have targeted in the past, like Cologne and Leuven, and Sydney and Melbourne University target Brussels, because they're all places that are close to a grocery store, easy enough with public transport to get to tracks and runs. Often you can run to the run, effectively, run to somewhere there's a big trail, and ease of sort of access to an airport that doesn't have outrageous flight prices. We spoke about earlier, some people we know that are in St. Moritz, which is a really popular altitude training venue, but can be a bit more expensive. It's very convenient because everything is in one sort of ski town effectively in the summer, but you've got to decide whether that's for you or not, and often they'll drive from there to one of the sort of bordering areas in Italy where there's another track that's a bit lower. So just like having an understanding of where you're training and how you're going to get to everything and how much time that's going to take, and how viable all your sessions and runs are, and what the value might be in chopping or changing parts of that.
So there's a lot to think about for athletes wanting to go overseas. And often worthwhile to engage a manager once you get to a certain level.
I think if you have any level of unsurety about what races you may or may not be able to get into, and even in the sort of, I guess, only 7 or 8 months I've been at it, it's been athletes it's just been as small as knowing a schedule or knowing whether there's pace or not at a meet, and that's made really monumental differences in their performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, touching on another topic is sponsorship. Obviously, when you talk management, you also think about the word sponsorship.
Yep.
What's the relationship there, and how does that work?
I guess in Australia we've had, a set sort of stereotype of agent for a long time, and in other countries that can differ. Sometimes you might just handle races for an athlete. In Australia, often it's multifaceted in terms of having relationships with apparel brands, and basically we don't have a lot of money in the sport in Australia, so there's a very high benchmark to even get kit, effectively, as it's referred to, so getting clothing or shoes or things that will help, in terms of even if it's just a discount or not paying at all. And for a lot of brands, the entry point for that can be a senior world championship team, which sounds kind of crazy, but they're obviously looking for a sort of return on investment, and often their budgets are quite small. Part of that these days as well will be social media following. Sometimes that can trump ability. You might be the most talented athlete in the world, but if nobody really knows who you are, or you don't have much of an online presence, that can be quite difficult to sell. Whereas athletes who might not be quite there yet, but have a really huge social media following, it can be easier to get them product. And from there, I think...
So that is important. They do need to build themselves a platform.
I think,
from an athletic perspective.
We often talk to athletes about being, intelligent with how you use social media, and that often if you have a level of athletic ability that others don't, they're, not in a narcissistic sense, but in a general interest sense, people may be curious as to what your lifestyle or training is like. It doesn't mean you have to showcase some of that. There are sponsored athletes that have not so great social media, but it's more thinking of it like a balanced scale. The worse your online profile may be, maybe the more talented you'd have to be, or more results you'd have to get that sort of kit in return.
So the brands are looking for a return in their investment to social media platforms as well.
Definitely. Sort of having been told by brands that it's like, when so-and-so makes a senior team, let us know, and starting sometimes as small as just kit from there, which is kind of unimaginable for some people, but Yeah, and that's another element of that, communicating with an athlete and their coach and whoever else is involved in their life, if that's something they're not comfortable with, and sort of where they stand in committing to stuff like that or not.
Well, Sean, thanks for coming in for a chat today.
No problem.
You've enlightened everyone, I hope, on having a representative as an athlete, and also hopefully inform some coaches on how a manager can help them and their athletes.
I hope it helps.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.